Welcome to the Jaded Buddha. This is a podcast where we talk about spirituality, metaphysics, and just the strangeness that is our human experience. So, starting off, I think what I want to talk about is the conceptual world. When I talk about the conceptual world, it is something that's a little bit hard for us to grasp, because thinking about when we refer to this object in front of me, we call it a table. If you look at what we are doing here, we are taking a collection of symbols that form the word table, a collection of sounds. And it is, as is said in Zen Buddhism, it is like a finger pointing at the moon, meaning that this concept, this collection of symbols that we have in our head, is pointing to what is here. But what is actually in front of me is not a table. It is just what it is. And this is an incredibly important thing to recognize. And more so an important thing to experience. Because so long as you are going about your everyday life, constantly labeling everything around you, you are like a narrator inside of your head. And it's really nonstop. You go around, you see a person, you make some judgments about that person, think about how you feel about that person, what they're wearing, the way that they're walking. Are they a threat to you? Are they a romantic interest? You look at the scene around you and you judge how it makes you feel, where you'd rather be the other times you've been in this place and how you felt then. And your mind is just constantly jumping around from one abstract concept to another. When we look at a human being walking down the street, we aren't seeing the actual being. We're not seeing what is there in the material world. What we are seeing is an amalgam of judgments, of beliefs, of concepts that we're imposing on what we're perceiving. So what this being is in reality is, you could say matter, but matter is just another concept that is pointing to what is. So if you really think about it, we, in the world of concepts, often have a fairly thorough understanding of the world around us. But if you consider that those concepts are not in a direct relationship to the reality, they are pointing to the reality, I'll say, but they are not the reality themselves. So for me, the way that I came to this realization was, since the start of puberty, I experienced very incredible insecurity and severe social anxiety. An inferiority complex was the root of it. It is looking at yourself and seeing all of these flaws, imperfections, things that you do not appreciate about the totality of what you are. And you call yourself boring or interesting. You call yourself ugly or beautiful. You call yourself smart or stupid. And I saw these concepts as completely absolute for the longest time. There was really no questioning this operating assumption that when I thought of myself as boring or interesting in a given moment, that it wasn't absolute. That this concept, which I was treating as absolute was only relative, in the sense that if you perceive yourself as boring it has to exist in relationship to its polarity, which is interesting. And what I mean by this is that how would you know what boring was if you did not know what interesting was? They are interconnected and inseparable. But here's where it gets tricky. So you say, sure, they are these polarities, interesting and boring, are dependent on one another. But not only that, they are completely subjective. What we define as interesting is dependent on our preferences as an individual, and our preferences are not objective. We can look at the structure of a molecule, and we can understand that objectively, that is the way that it is. It is a fact. But with something as subjective as what you define as interesting, that is completely subjective. And once you recognize that all of these judgments about yourself and about others, which have formed your reality for most of your life, then you realize, wow, am I living in a big dream of my own creation? Am I living in a illusory world that appears to be absolute? And this is sort of the start of, in my opinion, the start of the journey. Of course, the journey, when I refer to the journey, what I'm specifically referring to is self-inquiry. When you delve into our perception of ourselves, and when you observe your mind and the patterns that it goes through on a daily basis, the sorts of self-critique, the sorts of the ways in which you view yourself as an individual, and you question, is that true? Am I really this way or that way? Am I really an interesting person, a cool person? Am I really a stoner? Am I really a jock? Am I really an emo? What am I? And this is, although the simplest possible question you can ask yourself, is seemingly the most simple question, it is not simple at all. Because we start defining ourselves, we give our name, we give a sort of profile of our body, where we were born, our family, which our social status, our profession. We go through this whole list of concepts, which is forming a story in our heads. It's like these concepts are like words in a book, forming the story of our lives. And when you first ask yourself, who am I? Most people have this big elaborate story that they've been telling about themselves for so long that they've come to believe that it's true. And not to say that it's not true, because it's relatively true. In the same way that it could be said that there is relatively what you could call a boring person and an interesting person. Although these things are subjective, in the sense that they're not absolute in any way, they are true in a certain sense. In the world of our minds, within our our mental world, these things are true. But if you dive deeper and you say, no, I'm not interested in that stuff. I want to know what I am beyond all of these, beyond the story that I've been telling about myself. You ask yourself, am I my thoughts? Am I this body that I seemingly control? Am I things that I do? Am I defined by my past and the influence that I've had in others' lives? There's so many different aspects of your existence to contemplate in this journey of self-inquiry. And it's like peeling layer by layer the skin off of an onion, where as you go deeper you find that what you identify as you is becoming more and more profound and more vast, and more real. When I'm talking to someone, making small talk, it doesn't feel very authentic. It doesn't feel very meaningful, because I'm telling them the story that I've written about myself that has been reinforced throughout my life by the people around me, because they believe that the stories in their heads are true. So we sort of have this collective conspiracy. And one way of putting it is, it's like to keep each other comfortable. Or like, if I pretend like your story is real, then you have to pretend that my story is real. And so I know this is not just my experience, because I've talked to a lot of people throughout my life, and they relate to this. Small talk, talking about your education, about your job, about the things that have happened to you throughout your life. When you define yourself as the things that you've done, this is very superficial. It doesn't feel deep. And that's why we call it surface level conversation, because it's the outer surface of who we are. And at a certain point, people end up having what's often referred to as an identity crisis, where they realize, wow, I've been defining myself by my family, by my place of living, by my body, by my personality, and suddenly your personality changes. Suddenly your body changes, you grow older. Suddenly your country becomes war-torn and you have to leave. And then these things that you've been depending on for your identity fall away from you, and you're left kind of grasping at air. So this is when you peel off a layer of the onion and you go deeper into your being to understand, what am I? Who am I? What am I at a deeper level? And this, to me, is the value of a deep conversation, a deep intellectual conversation. And by intellectual, I don't necessarily mean factual, in the sense of you are educating the person. You're switching from the role of the student to the teacher and back to the role of the teacher and the student. It's not necessarily showing each other what you know. What I mean by deep intellectual conversation is connecting with the person in a way where you are investigating the elements of your day-to-day experience that are very essential and that the elements of your experience that all of us can relate on. For example, the experience of being I. When we refer to, we say, this is my body, this is my personality, this is my life. Who is this I that we're referring to? It's like all of these concepts that we have about ourselves, the whole story of our life, gravitates around this I. And everyone is I. Everyone is I. And yet we act as though I am I and they are them. There is the division between self and other. And what you learn through this deep conversation is that, sure, our thoughts are going to be very different. Our minds are going to be different. Our personalities, we may relate in some ways, but they're bound to be very different because they are the result of, they're the product of our entire lives. And our bodies are going to be different. Our life circumstances are going to be different. But this I, which we all understand to be who we are, is the same in everyone. So often, even in the most intimate, deep conversation, there remains this separation between self and other, where you're hanging out with your homie and you are really in love with them. You are dwelling in the place of love inside of you, where you trust, respect, and are completely open to this person. And yet there still remains the division between me and you. So it really takes a special connection, a special sort of connection to have these sorts of conversations where you recognize your oneness, the way in which, although we may be different, we are the same. And in Buddhism, the term is called Satsanga, and it is seen as a crucial part of the spiritual journey. And it means surrounding yourself with a community of people who are also on the path of self-inquiry. These are all people who are trying to figure out what lies beneath the surface. Who am I beneath the story that I tell about myself? And these sorts of relationships, sometimes they'll be relationships with spiritual teachers or just with incredibly close friends. Sometimes with family, sometimes with lovers. We have these moments where we recognize, and not even recognize, we experience that what I am at my deepest level is the same as what you are. Once we recognize this, it's almost like the pilot's light has been lit. And from that point on, even if you don't realize you're doing it, there is a seeking that is happening where you are searching for this I, searching for the place in which we are the same. Because it is horribly painful to be separate from everyone else, to experience on a day-to-day basis that I am me and you are you, and there's this profound and indissoluble barrier between us. For one, it creates a great deal of fear, because we feel that what I am is limited to this body and this mind. And of course, as humans, our bodies are incredibly fragile. So if we believe that we are only this individual, then we are living in fear. And more specifically, we're living seeking comfort and security. Because that comfort and security are the safety nets that we use against fear. So once you sort of get a taste of it, a taste of the oneness, then it's over. You are going to keep going back for more. Once you get a taste from the fountain of eternal youth, you are going to keep going back for more. Because the bliss that one experiences when they realize that what I am at my deepest level is the same as what you are. That feeling of unity with all beings and with everything is incomparable to any other pleasure. It is incomparable to any other fulfillment. So, in a way, of course, the spiritual journey can't be defined as one thing. I think that would be a oversimplification. But on its most basic level, the purpose of spiritual exploration is discovering the self. Who am I? We are asking ourselves, even if not directly, who am I? And the way that we usually answer that question is we look around us and we ask the people around us, who am I? And they will tell us, you're so-and-so, you do this and this. Here are all of these judgments about you, all of these, here's where you rank on in the social hierarchy. And so long as we take what others say about us to be absolute, then our understanding of ourselves is absolutely surface level. And this leaves us very insecure. Because if our identity is dependent on something like our personality, which is always changing, then we're constantly going to be suffering. Because we are identifying ourselves with something that is impermanent. And when it goes, we are left scared and confused. And the truth is, everything is impermanent. Our minds, our bodies, our lives, all material things as well, dissolve and decay eventually. And this is an incredibly important theme in Buddhism, is recognizing that everything is impermanent. And so long as we are grasping at air and trying to find something permanent to hold on to, we are going to be in this eternal tumult, jumping from one identity to another. We're going to be existing in a constant identity crisis. So here's where the teachings of Advaita Vedanta, non-duality, that have their root in Hinduism, particularly in the sacred text, the Upanishads, are incredibly valuable for freeing oneself from this eternal tumult, from the eternal identity crisis, from the eternal suffering. This is the place that a person goes when they are ready to stop jumping around and stop pretending that everything that they have control is really the big thing. The spiritual path is the process of giving up the illusion that you have control. And this relates directly to impermanence. If everything is impermanent, then so long as we hold on to these passing phenomena, so long as we hold on to our thoughts, hold on to our relationships, not saying that you completely give up your relationships, but so long as we are clinging mentally to these things as if they were permanent, we are going to be suffering. And this idea of escaping from suffering is foreign to most people. They just don't think that it's possible because life is suffering. All that they know is suffering. If you look at the teachings of the Buddha, his first teaching was everything is suffering. Life is suffering. Death is suffering. Getting what you want is suffering because you'll lose it. Getting what you don't want is suffering. Birth is sickness is suffering. Of course, this seems like a very cynical and painful perspective of things. And that may be true if you stop there. But the path of Buddhism is recognizing that the source of this suffering is clinging of mind. It is your mind holding on to the ever-changing world as if it was not going to change. And it is the fearful individual mind trying to control that which cannot be controlled, trying to control our thoughts, trying to control what happens in our lives, trying to control what happens in other people's lives. When you believe yourself to be completely separate from everyone else, when you feel this invisible barrier, this indissoluble barrier between self and other, you live in fear. And the easiest way to remedy this fear is to control, to have power. And this is where a lot of our world conflicts comes from, is the lack of recognition that it is okay to not have control. And the way out of suffering is to let go of control. But letting go of control doesn't mean just floating through life, not really doing anything with yourself. It doesn't mean not fulfilling your responsibilities and just kind of living in the mountains. Some people choose to live that way, but it's not necessary. It's just their personal choice. So what I mean by this is that we are constantly entertaining the illusion that we are the thinker of our thoughts and the doer of our actions. Here's a very simple and clear way of understanding it. Inside of our bodies right now, I look at my finger. Inside my finger is made of cells. Inside of these cells are millions of chemical reactions going on, interactions between proteins and amino acids, between different enzymes and molecules. There are billions of things happening in my body right now. And in all of our bodies, that is creating this, that is allowing us to stay alive and maintain homeostasis. And yet we don't act as if we are doing it. We don't act as if we are making our blood pump. We're not acting as if we are making our cells perform mitosis. We don't believe that we are making our heart beat and our immune system fight infection. All of that is happening of itself, and we recognize that. And yet we, for some reason, believe that this individual I that our whole life story gravitates around is in control of our thoughts and in control of our actions. How does this make any sense? So we are this individual I, which we believe ourselves to be, is somehow responsible for our physical actions and our thoughts, and yet it is in control of nothing else. Everything else is happening of itself. If you really contemplate this and observe your experience, you realize that this individual I that I've been talking about, it's the I that all of us identify with. It isn't real. This is what is referred to in Hinduism as avidya, or ignorance. This, it's also referred to as the ego. The ego, this word, since it came from Freudian psychology, it has many different meanings depending on where the word is being used, in what context. But what I'm referring to as the ego is this imaginary I that we believe to be in control of our thoughts and our actions. It is the imaginary individual self which is the independent source of action. It's the free agent inside of us. The little man inside of our head that's controlling things. And the purpose of meditation is to not... Eventually, the goal is to experience thoughtless awareness. But at first, you, in many meditation practices, simply watch your thoughts as they flow. You watch your breath as it rises and falls. You are aware of the sensations as they come and go, of twitches that happen in your body. And as you continue to meditate and observe how even without our conscious effort, our thoughts just keep going and going and going and going, you recognize that we are not creating this. We are not generating each and every thought as an act of free will. And so the next step from there, for most people, is, well, maybe a lot of that stuff is happening unconsciously or subconsciously. But there is, when I focus my attention and concentrate, I do have a certain degree of free will. And that would make sense, considering we can we can use our mind in specific ways and perform specific tasks if we concentrate our attention. But in the same way that it doesn't make sense to see this individual I as in control of our thoughts and our actions, but not everything that is happening in the body, who's to say that our mind fulfilling these complex tasks and adapting to different situations that we face, who's to say that that's not happening of itself as well? What is the separation between a conscious and an unconscious action? And this is where things sort of start to get weird. And for many people, frightening. Because we had, over the past couple, however long, we've been peeling away different layers of the onion. We peeled back the story we tell ourselves, the story of our lives. We peeled back for example, we look at our social status and our social roles, and we often identify with this because it is relatively who we are. It's a part of who we are. But if you just say, I do recognize that that's part of me, but I'm going to dive deeper. You peel off layer after layer after layer, until you come to this I, the homunculus inside of your head that is in control. It is the one who is afraid because it thinks that, well, it doesn't think. It carries out the illusion, and more so creates the illusion that we as an individual have control over what happens. And you've peeled off so many layers of the onion, and you've let go of all of these identities. And suddenly you realize that at the root of my entire life, of everything that I've known myself to be, is this I that is in control. And you're telling me that that I isn't real, that it's an illusion. This provokes great fear in people, and often following this recognition or experience comes a period which is referred to as the dark night of the soul. And this is where you realize that there's nothing to hold on to, basically. Before, when you were jumping from one identity to another, you were grasping at air because you were sort of swinging from branch to branch, from identification to identification. And once you reach this final point and recognize that there is no I that is in control, you desperately try and hold on to who you used to think you were. You cling on desperately to your previously established identity because it's comfortable. It is the known. We're afraid of the unknown. And it is what we've identified with our entire lives. And so there often, from this point on, is a lot of fear and a lot of clinging. Exactly what we were trying to avoid, acting as if these things, which are ever changing, were permanent. We are holding on tighter than we ever have before because we can't forget what we know. Once you experience and truly acknowledge that the I, which I've identified as me my entire life, isn't real, you can't really forget that. It's not the sort of knowledge that slips away when you distract yourself. So, of course, the spiritual journey will be different for everyone because it's completely subjective, in the same way that our personality is dependent on the totality of our life experiences. The way that our you could say spiritual exploration, or you could just say self-exploration unfolds, is completely dependent on a whole lot of factors that we can't truly understand. But at least for me and for many people, they go through this period of intense clinging on to who they used to be. And slowly, one comes to the recognition that it is okay to not have control. It is okay to not hold on, to let go. And that can be seen as the objective, if there is an objective of meditation, is to let go of control. To, even if your daily life is very stressful and requires that you maintain the illusion of having control, Let's say you're a CEO and you're responsible for many different people. Once you kind of drop the mask, meditation is crucial because it is recognizing that, man, what a big joke. I don't have control. I don't have any more control than anyone else does. And this is a relief. It at first, when people experience what could be referred to as the dark night of the soul, or some people think that they've fallen off of the path, the spiritual path. But it's more so realizing that all of this fear which your life has, it's been at the root of your being for so long as you can remember. Everything that you understand yourself to be is built on this root fear created by the illusion that we have control. And when you realize that you don't, that fear is only brought into overdrive. Because if you don't have any control based on your previous models of who you were or of who you are, that's terrible. Like, I need to survive. I need to keep my things together. I need to fulfill my responsibilities. If I'm not in control, how can I do that stuff? And so now the fear is greater than it's ever been before. But as I said, over time, the individual realizes that it's not that I'm not in control anymore. It's not that since my, what could be called awakening, I have lost control. It's that I've never had control in the first place. I had completely deluded myself by believing that I had any sort of control. So this fear at the root of our being, at the core of our personality, at the core of a lot of our habits and behaviors, at the core of our neuroses, this fear begins to slowly dissipate and turn into peace. It's the peace of recognizing that it is okay to just be. I don't need to be afraid because I don't have any control no matter what, and I never have, and I never will. And that is okay. It is okay. And this is beautiful. This is freedom from fear. And when I say this, you may assume that I mean that you don't experience any fear. But this simply isn't true. Fear is a experience, or it's a emotion like any other. You feel the emotion of joy, and it is experienced physically, mentally, in very subtle ways. In the same way, fear is an appropriate response to some environmental factors or to some situations. So I'm not saying that when you recognize that you don't have control, you will live life without any fear. But even in those moments where you're deeply afraid, there is almost there's a spaciousness, a recognition that although things may appear very bad, I know that there is nothing to worry about because I don't have control. So from here, this is, you're kind of left floating around in space, you could say. You were a desperate seeker before, grasping for something to identify yourself with. You were a faceless actor searching desperately for a costume, and suddenly you realize, I don't need to wear a costume. And this allows for a much deeper exploration. If I am not even this illusory I, which everyone believes themselves to be, it's almost a self-propagating system, because since everyone believes that they are this little person inside their head, in control, we are all feeding each other's illusion. We are trapped in this delusion of being an individual. And this is, when I refer to the deeper level of exploration, this is where the fear turns into peace, and the peace turns into love and compassion. This is where you start to recognize that self and other is an illusion. When you're in deep meditation, you are watching as your thoughts come and go. They are like leaves floating down a river, or clouds passing through this vast open sky. And if you are aware of these clouds as they pass, if you, while in meditation, are willing to drop your identification with your thoughts, you recognize that perhaps rather than being my thoughts, I am the space through which the clouds of thought come and go. Perhaps I am the water deep down upon which the leaves flow downstream. And as you meditate more, you spend more time in this space where what I am is not a person. I am not a body. I am not a mind. I am not a personality. I am not anything that I would ever identify myself with in day-to-day life. I am this spaciousness, comparable to this vast open sky that the clouds pass through. And one word for this spaciousness is consciousness. Now, consciousness is impossible to define because it's not a tangible thing. It's not a thing at all. What a thing is referring to is when we take one element of our perception, looking at what you could call a table here in front of me. I am taking this bit of existence and separating it out from everything around me. And because I have this conceptual division between the table and everything else, the table is a thing. This deodorant on my table is a thing. The notebook is a thing. But when you look at consciousness, at this vast spaciousness, you realize that it's not a thing. There's any concept that you would use to define our internal and external experiences. What I mean by this is our sensory experiences and our emotions and mental activity. Any concepts that you use to explain and understand these don't really apply to this consciousness, because this consciousness has no features. It has no attributes. And this is what is so beautiful about this recognition that what I am is not my thoughts, not my body, not anything that I do. It is this awareness, this consciousness. When I find myself going upstairs, going into the fridge and grabbing a jar of kimchi, I am conscious of my body moving up the stairs, my mind racing around from one food desire to another. And if I identify myself as these desirous thoughts, and if I identify myself as my body moving through space, for one, I am in time, because our body is impermanent. It's subject to decay. It's constantly changing. And our mind is also constantly changing on a day-to-day basis. But this consciousness, which is just awareness, you could say, it is the space of awareness in which everything is observed. This awareness has been the same since we were children. If it is just awareness of what is being perceived, how is my consciousness when I was 3 different from my consciousness now? And at a much deeper level, how is my consciousness different from your consciousness? Are they different in any way? And what I would say is that they're not. Our thoughts, our minds are incredibly different. From person to person, there is so much variety there. Our bodies, although maybe on a genetic level, are 99.8% carbon copies of one another, they are significantly different from person to person. Our personalities are all very different, but this consciousness, which is it is the being inside each of us. When you talk about a human being, it is the being that resides inside of the human. It is no different in me and you. And when I talk about oneness, recognizing the way in which we are the same, I'm speaking of recognizing that what I am at the deepest level, once I peel the onion to its core and even go beyond, what I am is the exact same thing that you are. Not a thing. It is awareness. It is being. And this being that I truly am, it is aware of negative emotions. It's aware of negative thoughts. It's aware of negative sensations as well as positive sensations, positive thoughts. But it is unaffected by any of it. Because, sorry about that. It is this illusory I, who we believe to have control, that has a problem with the phenomena going on in our awareness. Because this ego, you could call it, is built on the illusion that we can change what we're experiencing. and change the world around us, since we believe ourselves to be the actor rather than the witness, the director rather than the audience. We are unable to really identify with the way in which we are one. And that's why most people go throughout their entire lives without experiencing what it's like to feel at one with the universe, to feel truly vulnerable and truly connected to the people around them, is because they are so trapped in their individuality that they're not able to recognize their unity. And this is the beautiful thing, is although what we are at our deepest level, you could say the consciousness which illuminates our mind, that doesn't negate from our individuality. It doesn't take away from the ways in which we are different. Because the ways in which we are different is what makes us special. It's what makes life interesting. If, when interacting with your loved ones, with your friends, with your family, they were exactly the same as you, were completely identical to you, physically, mentally, in their personality, would it be any fun at all? No, it wouldn't. Because the fun comes from the drama created by the illusion that we are individuals. And the way in which it's an illusion is that no matter how different we are, we will always, at our core, just be being itself. You could say beingness, awareness, consciousness. If we are able to recognize in every moment that I am, at the same time, all of these things that I identify with, like I am all of the layers of the onion, as well as sort of at the core, a passive, peaceful being, then no matter what happens physically to us, no matter how much pain we endure, no matter how much happens to us emotionally and mentally, there is always the experience that the pure consciousness is unaffected. The audience, although it is very engaged in what is happening during a play, they are not in it. So in the same way, this pure consciousness, which is our true identity, it is the self that we refer to when we say I. This real I is unaffected by everything that happens in the body and the mind. And so to recognize one's identity with that consciousness is to, in a way, be free from the suffering of life. I think this is a good place to end this first podcast. For anyone who's made it this far, I appreciate you listening very much. And I hope that you have a wonderful day and that you were able to gain something out of this.